right, was right here. And that was inside of our create. I put this by bug, and then we had this like user params where we intercepted the password field. And then in our users model, what we then did was overwrote the password digest. Let me uncomment it because it's a bit difficult to read. We overwrote the password digest by hashifying the password, and then we wrote this authenticate method. We haven't used it yet, but we wrote it because at some point we'll have to actually attempt to authenticate a user. Right, so let's go do that now. Let me just recomment this all. And really when that's going to happen is at the login process. And so here I've created a login. Let me ask you a very serious question. Does this look restful to you? Great. At some point you will have to break rest. And that's, I know, gasp. And that's okay, right? The idea here is that convention over configuration. If most of your application is RESTful, right, all the things are very easy. Like how many times have you showed me a bug and I looked at your route and go, I know exactly what file it's in? Because that's how REST works. It's so easy to follow and understand immediately. But here, login doesn't really make sense. I don't need to build a login controller. I don't need all 7 RESTful routes for login. When are you going to edit the login?
Yeah.
Like, what does that even mean? Like, dude, I'm just trying to log in here. So I created a lot of these paths for you. So I did literally a get to /login, and what controller action do you think I hit?
Application control.
Right. That's the first time you're like, okay, there's some sort of decision I need to make. All right. If you put an application controller, that would in fact work, and that's no problem. The idea here is if we don't want every single controller to inherit, we don't want to put an application, because then through the power of inheritance, every single controller will get it. The fact that you're just trying to log somebody in, authenticate them, and then do we want to create like a flash or like a session for them?
Session.
Exactly. So for me, it made sense that when somebody logs in and the logic for logging in doesn't need to be an application controller. Because if it's there, that means that the Nacho controller has access to login logic, which it doesn't need. Right? The user controller has access to login logic, which it doesn't need. So I made a separate controller. And because I'm going to be making a session, I'll just put it here. Because I'll be making a session, guess what I called it?
Session controller.
There we go. Cool. So a get to /login hits the sessions controller at a, actually I forgot. What would you call it? What controller action would you put in sessions? Okay, so sessions login, right? But what are we making right now? An old session?
You.
Powerful. I just did a sessions new. Cool. This screen's a little bit tricky. Is that a little bit better?
That's perfect.
For you guys in the back?
Yeah.
That's okay, right? You cool in the back? All right. I looked over. I was like, oh, that's tiny. All right. So, oh man, it's so big on the screen. Anyways, great. A get to /login hits the sessions new, and then in my sessions new, I have a lot going on here, and that's okay. I'm going to explain everything. All I do is render new. Knowing what you know about Rails, do I even need this line? No. So this is actually what my new looks like. Cool. I left this in here because it's better to be a little bit more explicit with render, because we will start to use Rails as purely a backend in JavaScript. So even though this is implicit, I implore you to write render, because you will start to need it and use it. If you're building a full stack Rails app, the convention is to let it implicitly render like this. But because we're in the schoolhouse here and I want you to get used to writing render, because we'll be using it a lot more in JavaScript, that's why I'm asking you to do it. All right, is that fair? Did you feel good with that? Cool. So naturally in sessions, I'll have something called new. Wow. Any questions on this? Right? Is there an object here for my form? Try again. So do I have an object for a form 4? No, this is one of the few times you'll start to see, like, great, if I don't have an object and I still need a form tag comes into play. Things like search. There's no object to search for, so you'll have a form tag. And so I will have to post to /login, and I will have to create that route at that point. And so for my routes, I've already done it for you. I did a post login, and it does, guess what? Hacky RESTful, sessions create. So kind of RESTful, kind of not really, but you can read it and immediately understand what's happening. This is some sort of form that makes a new session, and this, guess what? Creates a session. Right? If your code is very easily readable, anyone can walk in and immediately start making adjustments. So in my sessions create, I'm sorry, let's go over new. It's just username and password with the login button. Are there any questions on just this form? It's pretty simple, right? So I'm
the crypto password situation set up for that?
yes, yeah, and you'll see it. And so remember, I just need a form, and all I want is a user to send me the params of their username, because guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to use a find in my database with the username, like a find by. And then I have the plain text password as params password. Now I can start to use that authenticate method. And so this just goes into login path. I could have made it anything I want, but ultimately I decided on this because it was RESTful-like. So when this submits, I'm going to hit what? When I post to /login, the sessions controller create action. So in my create, this is where it gets tricky, and this is where I'm going to explain a lot of the code. So here. First thing is we need to actually find the user. We can do that because we have the params username coming from the form. So we don't need this anymore, but we can do is break this down. Cool. Remember, this comes across as params. The username and the params password, whatever the user typed in. I'm going to do a find by. Here's why. Does anyone know the difference between find and find by?
Find by ID, find by the correct complete column.
You are correct in the sense that find defaults to and will accept an ID. Find by, you can pass in other attributes. There's something else important about find and find by, and I'll show you. So I can do, let's just check all my users. I made a bunch of loser users over here. Wow. Oh, let's use ya boy. Frick, what was it? PA Rivers?
Yeah.
All right, sure, great. So ID 10.
Oh, no, it was PA Jack Rivers.
Nice. All right, so I can do user.find with an ID of 10, and I get ya boy, right? If I do user.findBy, I have to tell it what I'm finding by, and that's going to be the ID. And that ID is 10. Cool. Same person. If I do user and I find by ID number 9003, what happens?
No user.
That's right, nil. Very important. Nil is a real value. Now, if I were to do find, and I were to say his power level is over, also 9,000, this user clearly does not exist. It will error and break. It will break your code. So find and find by are important. Find by, if it does not find, it will return nil. And find, if it doesn't find, it will break. It will throw an error. So that's an important distinction there. Now, it's important that you get the nil because, have you ever typed in your username wrong? Yes. What do you think this is going to return if you used find? Even though find only takes an ID, but if we had to use find. Do you think it'll say nil, or do you think it'll go, oh snap, this thing doesn't exist in a database, and you'll get the red, the Rails errors? Like, is that a good user experience? No. So what we want is either a real user object or nil. That's what we're going to get here, right, when the user types in. So this is an important piece of code because Ruby, the way it evaluates is it's very lazy. And let me explain. So what is true and true?
True.
Oh, very good. Thank you. Easy, right? What is true and false?
False.
Very good, right? What is true and what's a variable or method we have not declared? Just any name for it.
Jack.
Destroy.
Just
Oh, no, you did that.
Jeff, Jack,
Jack.
Jack.
It could be an
P, Jack, A, River, Jack, right? Very good. So that variable or method has never been declared. True or false? Have I ever?
True that you did not declare.
Great. So what will I actually get?
False.
Not false, undefined local variable or method. Because I never defined it. It's very clear of what I'm saying, right? So it evaluated the right side because the left side was true. Now, if I were to get false and something definitely not defined, what do I get?
False.
Because it's lazy. If the left side is false and I see an and, the entire statement must be true for me to evaluate. The fact that I've already run into a false and I hit the and, Ruby's like, doesn't matter. I already know it's false. Stop, ceasefire, freeze. Won't even attempt to evaluate. And that's important because if this is nil, nil is considered truthy or falsy.
True. False.
Nil, is that considered truthy or false?
Truthy. False.
Okay, I'm just going to tell you the answer. Nil evaluates to false in a truthy statement. All right, just so there's no confusion. So apparently there was, but now there is no more. Yes? Nil,
Yes.
Nil is false.
Yes.
All right?
Is it?
Yes. There are more rules to learn in JavaScript, but you have at least another few days to get there. So don't worry. All right, so check it out. The way this looks regularly is, all right, so this is the shortcut. Because guess what? If the find by returns nil, this is what? False. And it will not even bother running. Here's why that's important. Remember we did the nil wrapping for error messages? If at user, right, dot like exists or something like that, and then you have to do also if at user dot authenticate. Because you want to see if it's like a real thing, and then you want to authenticate. You can just cut that out and put it like this. It will not work the other way, because guess what happens? Okay, that didn't work out as well as I thought it would, right? If I ran it this way, what would happen? If I put in a user that did not exist, and this became nil,
It would throw an error.
it would say undefined method for nil class, right? Can you call authenticate on nil?
No.
No. So it has to be in this order. Does that make sense? And that's why this is like the sort of shorthand for it. So it's a little bit like sexier Ruby code. That's all. If you put the nested if statements, it would be totally fine. But this is like a way to level up your Ruby. Cool. So what I really want to do is I find the user, and if that user actually exists, I get a real user object. Then I run that authenticate. Let's take a look at what that authenticate does. Takes in a plain text password. I have that because I have the params password right here in the create, which was from the post to /login, which is coming from this field, coming from right here. Check. Cool. So, plain text password. All it does is it does that new with that self.password digest. It's in the database. Because remember, authenticate is an instance method that has to be called on an object, the user object, and that is going to be right here. So what is self.password digest? It's that long hashified string. So here, I'm putting in that long hashified string, and I'm comparing it to params password, what the user typed in. Is it actually PA Rivers? I should get true or false. Boom. What it will actually return me is the user object. So if this whole thing is true, right, the user actually exists, I found it in the database, and the password is correct, session. Make it right there to the user ID is equal to that user's ID. So now in my session, I have something at a key of user ID, like 7, or 10 in this case, right? Like your boy is 10. Great. And then I redirect and I bring it to the user show page. Cool. So if it doesn't work, what kind of error message do you want to give? Do you want to give more information or less information?
Less.
Yeah, less, right? You don't want to be like, hey, the username's good, but that password's really close. Come on now, all right? So something generic like, nah, nice try. HBO accounts are free. Cool. No, just kidding. Right? Nope. All right, just nope. And then send them right back to the login path. So let's see what happens. I'm in the login. Oh, embarrassing. Oh, embarrassing again. Boop, boop, boop. I try to log in. I will put in a username that does not exist. Like, my name is Jeff. Oh, that actually might be in there because I'm stupid. My name is Jeff0. And the password is Lamioki. Right? If I hit login, nope. Because it's Flash, quick refresh, and it's gone. Right? But here I have, oh, it looks like my email address. Great. All right. Yeah, boy. What was it? P.A. Jack Rivers. Very good. And this should bring me to the user show page. Hey! Flavor Town. Right? Look at that. Powerful. We run into a weird issue, though. And that is, on the show page, I have this delete button. I already wrote the code for it. So the idea is that if I were to go to users 9, what's stopping me from seeing it? Nothing. But the delete button is gone.
Ooh.
We want that feature, right? And let me show you how it works. Yeah? Like that feature? It's pretty boss. So what is that page? Probably user show. Cool. We have something like this. And that is, the idea here is that the current ID, there's a current user here. And whoever that current user is, it must be equal to this user show page. If that is true, then show the delete button. Does that make sense? Like,
Where's current user declared?
that's exactly where I'm going to lead. This is going to lead me to that. Yeah. If I didn't have current user, I can say if the session key of user ID is equal to this particular user ID, then you're good to go. Right? So what we want to do is we want to be able to keep track of who is currently the user. That would be very useful to us. Right? So the idea is somewhere we need to always be tracking who the current user is based on the session and a key of user ID. Who needs to know about who's currently logged in?
Application.
Everybody. Every single controller needs to know about this. So naturally, cool. I have something called current user here. And all it does is it just finds the user by the session of user ID. That's all it does. That gives me the user object. All right? Now the next problem we run into is, let's just say I log out of the application and I delete my user session or whatever. Someone deletes all the cookies. Is there a way that the application knows whether or not a user is logged in? And if nobody is logged in, do you want them to see all the parts of your application? So for example, right, let's just say I've never been on your website before. I do not have an account. Should I be able to click through every single thing on your website and see it? No. So not only do I want to keep track of who's logged in, but I want to know whether or not someone is logged in at all. And if they're not logged in, I can direct them to one of two pages. Hey, sign up or log in, right? So I made a method called login, and it does this right here. Bang, bang, current user. Let's learn. I can, in fact, see something. So what is true? What does true evaluate to?
True.
What is not true?
False.
What is not true?
True.
Very good. What about 7? What does that evaluate to?
True.
7.
Oh.
What is not 7 though?
False.
What is not 7?
True.
I can, in fact, using the double bang, coerce anything into its corresponding Boolean value. I'm going to say it one more time. With the bang bang, the not, I can coerce any value into its Boolean value, into its truthy Boolean value. It takes sometimes some people to get it immediately. Other people need like 5 seconds. Just by a quick show of hands. Bang, bang. Who feels comfortable with this? Okay, what powerful class. Powerful. Or the explanation was just really good. I mean, one or the other. You know, who knows?
False.
If it's a false bang,
Sorry, what?
if it's a false, like if it's a false
is a
and
what?
you do bang bang, it returns false.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, the truth is charging.
What was bang nil? My explanation was poor. My disappointment is immeasurable.
Your follow-up explanation though?
Question.
On fleek.
On fleek? Wow. I'm going to really enjoy you guys for JavaScript. All right, so
Bang bang on fleek.
Question.
true.
If
It's a truthy value. What's up?
you have something that you hit enter and it says undefined local variable, what's the truthiness of that?
The undefined local variable?
Like we did P Jack A River Jack.
So what you're saying is something like,
Undeclared, yeah.
yeah, okay,
Yeah.
right?
What's the truthiness?
And that's undefined? What is this?
Same thing the whole time.
It doesn't really matter because it's just undefined.
Okay. I didn't know.
That's a very good question,
It defines.
and it doesn't make it defined. Yeah.
Okay. Well, no, I just wonder if it'd say like nil or some other return statement.
If something doesn't exist, it cannot have a truthy value.
No matter how many bangs.
Yeah. You could bang it all day and nothing will happen.
Done.
I have to watch my mouth now.
Oh, yeah.
That was not great.
Recorded.
I can just not upload this, you know? No, it's fine. It's fine. These are technical Ruby terms. So, the idea behind whether or not someone is logged in is whether or not there is a current user, right? Is there somebody here with the session at a key of user ID? So, I could just take the current user and double exclamation mark the current user object. Yeah, I know. It's not as fun. It's just not. Sometimes you just want to double bang current user, you know? But either way, the idea here is that this will give me a Boolean value, right? And I, again, use the proper Ruby convention to see if it returns a Boolean value, it should end in a question mark. And so here, what I can use for logged in is a bunch of things. And that is exactly what I said. I want to know if someone is authorized. Remember, part 2 is authorization versus authentication. And that is, I will always redirect you to the login path unless you're logged in. That logic just sort of wrote itself, right? Like, if you're not logged in, go ahead and log in, dog. Like, I think my app is public and free. I spent hours on this. So, and then you can have some custom auth method. This is not important. So, here's the thing. If you actually want to lock your app down, authorized must be called before every single controller action, right? Like if I wanted to go make a new user, or I wanted to go see the user show page, I want to see the user's index page, I want to see anything, I want to make sure authorized gets called. So before any action, authorized must be called. And because it's an application controller, every single controller will call this. You run into a weird thing though, and I kind of said it. If you're not logged in, I have to push you to the login page. what if I try to log in? Where do you think that's going to push me?
To the login page.
To the login page. What if it's like, hey, listen, you got to go log in first before you can see the rest of the site. Cool. I actually never logged in before. I've never been to your website before. So let me create a new user. Yeah, that's not going to work. Go to the login page. So the thing about that is I can't even log in because I haven't created an account. So let me try to create a user. Slow down, buddy. Log in first. That becomes an infinite loop. So we want to be able to make sure we skip over this before action on a couple of pages. All right? So definitely want to skip over actually being able to log in.
Oh, that makes sense.
Powerful. And when you actually create a user. So skip before action on new and create. So this is what winds up happening if we do not do this. Ready? Let's go back to our application. And I want to go to users 9. Oh wait, I'm logged in. That's embarrassing. Let's log out. Cool. You logged out, lols, right? I can go to, let's just go to users 7. Right back to the login page. But let me go to users new. Right back to the login page. Embarrassing. So we have to make sure we skip before action on the new and the create. Because new just gives me the form. If I actually send the request to create, it'll go, whoa, just kidding. You better log in. That's not the right answer. And so are there any questions on the skipping before action for new and create on both the actual logging in and on creating a user and why we would do that? Yeah.
So I see a skip before action and I see a before action.
Powerful.
Can you just lump those two together by any chance, or is there a nuanced difference?
Oh, since the different method, you can't call them both at the same time.
You cannot call skip before action and before action. I mean, you can. You can call it before action and then skip before action on it. And guess what it will do? It will skip before action. So you might as well not write it, right? It's like, hey, why don't you go, like, get me some coffee? But there's no coffee. So if there's no coffee, don't get it.
Oh, okay.
Or you could have just not asked me to go get coffee, you know? Could have been better? Okay, your turn.
I'm not gonna.
Very good. So it's got to be on the spot. It's tough. It wasn't my best work, and I'm sorry. Forgiveness, please. So
Because he loves his coffee. That's his really.
Oh.
4 cups a day.
I'm sorry then. So so skip before action says like, hey, don't do this, and before action says definitely do this. Yeah. So you shouldn't be calling both.
Do you need a before action after skip before, or is it just convention?
You have no reason to call a skip before action if a before action is not called. Right? So for example, like, can I do a skip before action, right? Some method like, I don't know, skip me. Cool. Only on new and create, whatever, sure. And then in my application controller, I have a method called skip me. And all it does is it puts to the console y. This is literally never invoked. So if I go to my user's controller, it's going to skip it. But it's never invoked, so it does nothing. Cool? Good question. All right. Any questions so far about what we've talked about in terms of skipping before action, authorized, logged in, current user, session with the key of user ID?
What are sessions for?
Session?
All of the sessions?
Session is built by Rails and is placed inside the cookie, which is transferred between every single request. So the session is going to essentially persist some data and get rebuilt or reevaluated every request by Rails. Magic.
If you wanted to make like an admin user with all the views and all the privileges.
Yeah. So the question is, how can I create people with different levels of authorization? Is that what you're asking? So in my application controller, what does this do? It locks down the whole app, and you must do this, right? Unless you're logged in. Here, do you have access to current user? Okay, so redirect to login unless current user dot admin. Right, so you would have an admin boolean that's defaulting to false unless you set it to true. You know, something like that. You can like play around. It's all just Ruby. Once you can do good Ruby logic anywhere you want to write it, and then you would have that before action called throughout the rest of the application. So now that we have sort of this new, we have to create the logout function. And all it is just a link to or a button to that hits any custom route that pushes you to probably the same controller as all of this. So in my routes, I have something called delete to /logout. That's just the route and the HTTP verb that I created. Heck, this could be a get to /logout if you wanted it to be. But what that would mean is my button would just be then a get. Yes, no? Like this button basically hits a route, and all it does is it wipes the session.
Your delete count is also the logout.
That's the button up above, right?
Say again?
The button up above is the logout.
Oh, I'm sorry. This is the logout. You're right. Ooh, this is delete the account. Oh, you're right. This is the logout. Oh, embarrassing. Yeah. Whoa, zoning. Logout path and method delete. So the logout path hits a method delete. So in my routes, my logout path hits a method delete, and then it hits sessions destroy. So my session controller, I have something called destroy. I can either delete the key of user ID, or I can set it to nil. It's up to you. And then I'll just redirect to the login path. Great, you logged out. Hey, you want to log back in? I mean, that's really like the real user experience though, right? Like once you log out, it brings you back to like the home page or the login page.
Is there any particular reason you named that destroy and chose delete, or I mean, you said it could be get, but destroy.
This could be anything I want, like log me out tonight. Do. Yeah, we can be wherever we want, you know.
So it's just another custom route, basically.
Correct. Yeah, but I want that to be like half RESTful.
Gotcha.
Yeah. This is my day job, and I do not plan on quitting it. Thank you for all those in the back that are like, that's very good. Are there any questions on like logging out, how I'm hitting that route? Like I said, once you understand Rails, it's like I need a route that hits a controller action, and that controller action will do something, and then send a response. This current response is going to be, great, you logged out, the session is gone, go back to the login page. Or you like the flow is like pretty easy. Like if I talk to you now about the request response cycle, do you remember 3 weeks ago when I just like rolled up in your feelings and you were like, whoa, and now you're like, oh, request response cycle, obviously. Yeah? Bet. Cool. So now we want to talk about conditional rendering. So in the show page, you just drop these and write Ruby anywhere you want. This is just Ruby, right? If the current user's ID is this current user ID, I mean, heck, if you could, you'd probably get away with this. I probably should have used this. Actually, I'm going to keep this. This is better. This is better code. Yeah?
What if there's, oh, it's an object.
It's a user object, yeah. So now let's just talk about one additional extra feature, and then I'll let you go. So what if I wanted like a nav bar on my page? The nav bar is on how many pages? Just one or all of them? Where does all of... Close. Where does all of the views inherit from?
Layouts. Layouts application.
Yes. So in the body, you can just have like a sweet old div, right? Or I mean, you know what? Let's just put an A tag, a little href action, and this would just be like cool website, brah, right? And then it'd just be like eat and the A tag. Every single website will have this now. I mean, every single view page will have this. So I can just go, okay, whenever decides to finish. No, it's just network requests sometimes can take a while. Look, there it is, boom. Let's log into ya boy. What was it? P.A. Jack Rivers. Wow. There it is, again. I can delete this account, but because of that conditional rendering, 8, it's gone. Right? But the logout is still there. Bloop. That's the user. Yeah.
How can you make it so you just can't just type in random other people's stuff and go to different things?
You want to protect those routes, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, guess what? In the
If statement.
in the if
Add
statement.
more stuff. Add more stuff to it.
That's it. Yeah, man. I would do in the user control if you don't want the show, right? I just create a new private method right here and check to see if the current user ID, otherwise don't show the show.
And then the private method would be like part of the before action. Like
Yeah. Before action only on the show, and I didn't invoke it. Mm.
So to reiterate his question, he asked, how do you, what was the question? Because I heard the answer, not the question.
Yeah. The question is like, if I don't want someone to see the show, if they're not that person,
Right.
How do
Oh,
I
I
do
see.
that?
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, you could be really dirty about it. You could wrap the whole thing in a conditional. Like, watch this. Check it out. You ready? It's just Ruby. So where's this user show page? The user show page. Wow, so aptly named. I can drop this right here. So, ready? If current user, like we'll just add this exact logic, right? Actually, we'll just move this here. Boom. If the current user is the user, then show the show page. Otherwise, what else can we do? We can do else. What can we do?
Login.
H1 that says not your page, lols. So let's check it out.
Should have routed to the log.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could have blasted it right back to login too. But do you see what I'm saying? Like the conditional rendering. So now if you're logged in based on who you are and you're logging in, if you're the current user, you could show certain things or block certain people from entering certain routes.
Can you
Right? That's the authorization piece. Yeah.
sorry. Can you do something through routes? Like, you know how we go like user/ID?
User/ID.
And like for like our reservoir, it does automatically in resource.
Mhm.
But like, can we make it so if anything's not user like /user/ like your specific ID number? So any way to do that through routes? Or is this like
Routes is a trickier place where I would not add logic to. Right. What I would rather you do is use the routes to hit controller actions, and then the controller control whether or not something is like good or not. You know? So like control's starting to make sense now. Like before it was like it's the in between. It does everything else. But now you're like, all right, it basically controls the flow and what the user sees and what it can do, and finding instance variables, dealing with the model, and then sending a response. So hopefully MVC makes a little bit more sense now at this point. All right, as promised, 38 minutes and 40 seconds. What are your questions?
Can you push this up so we can reference it?
100%.
So for someone who hasn't created a login, password, or authentication of any kind, like just a quick rundown of the order of operations to attack it.
Yeah.
Do I start with sessions, or do I need to do the authentication first?
That's a very good question. Like if I don't have this currently inside my application, but this looks like a great feature and I want to add this and I've already hit MVP, then it would just be generate new migration, right? If you have a user's model or like a painter's model or whatever your like main person model is, you just do one of these bad Johnsons right here. Cool. Remember, add the bcrypt gem, bundle, has secure password, and then when you do the new migration, add to that user table, whoever it is, password digest as a column. Must be a string, and you're ready to rock.
Wow.
It's that fast. Yeah. Decrypt's amazing. Plus Rails.
And then,
And then you can create the whole login stuff, which is this entire lecture. So just watch at 2 times speed. This 40-minute lecture will only take you 20 minutes.
2 minutes.
20.
2 minutes is like, I'm trying to.
Cool. Are there any other questions? That's a good question. Awesome. Great. Go build your project.